The engine hummed in a monotonous rhythm as I navigated the desolate stretch of highway, the only companion being the eerie symphony of the night. The darkness outside seemed to swallow the beams of my headlights, leaving me feeling isolated in a world cloaked in shadows. It was past midnight, and I found myself on this lonely road, the only route back home after a long day's journey. The radio crackled sporadically, emitting bursts of static that only added to the unsettling atmosphere. I tried to distract myself with music, but each song sounded distorted, as if the night itself was tampering with the frequencies. Unease settled in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me with each passing mile. As I rounded a bend, a figure emerged from the darkness, standing motionless by the side of the road. My heart skipped a beat as I instinctively swerved to avoid it, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. But as my headlights illuminated the figure, relief washed over me. It was just a scarecrow, a leftover relic from some long-forgotten farm. I chuckled nervously, chiding myself for letting my imagination run wild. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I froze. The scarecrow was no longer standing by the roadside. Instead, it was now perched in the back seat of my car, its straw-stuffed limbs casting grotesque shadows on the upholstery. Panic surged through me, and I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. I whipped around, but the back seat was empty, save for my belongings strewn haphazardly across the seats. I shook my head, convinced it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my exhausted mind. Resuming my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were boring into the back of my skull. The road stretched on endlessly, each mile feeling like an eternity as the darkness pressed in around me. Suddenly, a figure darted across the road, forcing me to slam on the brakes once again. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered into the night, but there was no sign of whoever or whatever had crossed my path. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone out here, that something sinister lurked just beyond the reach of my headlights. The radio crackled to life once more, a voice cutting through the static with chilling clarity. "Beware the road you travel," it whispered, sending shivers down my spine. I fumbled to turn it off, but the voice persisted, taunting me with its cryptic warning. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white with fear. I just needed to make it home, to escape this nightmare and return to the safety of familiar surroundings. But with each passing mile, the road seemed to stretch farther and farther into the abyss, leading me deeper into the heart of darkness. As the minutes turned into hours, exhaustion began to weigh heavily on my eyelids. I fought to stay awake, to keep my focus on the road ahead, but fatigue threatened to pull me under. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, morphing into twisted shapes that seemed to beckon me into their embrace. And then, without warning, the headlights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic welled up inside me as I struggled to regain control of the car, my hands fumbling blindly for the ignition. But before I could react, a pair of cold hands closed around my throat, cutting off my scream. I thrashed and struggled, but the grip only tightened, squeezing the air from my lungs. And as consciousness slipped away, a voice whispered in my ear, its words echoing in the void. "Welcome to the darkness," it hissed as the world faded to black.
The darkness pressed in around me like a suffocating blanket as I drove down the narrow, winding road. The only illumination came from my headlights, which cast long, eerie shadows that danced along the edges of the dense forest that flanked the road. It was well past midnight and the silence was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white with tension. There was something undeniably unsettling about driving alone at night, especially on a road as desolate as this one. But I had no choice. I needed to get home before dawn, before whatever lurked in the darkness had a chance to find me. As I rounded a sharp bend, something darted out in front of my car, causing me to slam on the brakes. My heart leaped into my throat as I swerved to avoid it, my tires screeching against the asphalt. When I finally came to a stop, I glanced back at the road expecting to see an animal or maybe even a person, but there was nothing there. Just empty darkness. Shaken, I took a deep breath and continued on my way, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the road ahead, my mind kept returning to the image of that fleeting shadow, so quick and elusive that I couldn't be sure if I had really seen it at all. As I drove deeper into the night, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, each mile feeling longer and more treacherous than the last. The trees loomed ominously overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, threatening to ensnare me in their grasp. And all the while, the feeling of being watched lingered at the edges of my consciousness, like the lingering touch of a ghostly hand. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination running wild, that there was nothing out there in the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. The road was alive with something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for me to come along. Just as I was beginning to think that I might be losing my mind, I saw it, a figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat as I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a woman, her pale face illuminated by the glow of my headlights, her eyes empty and hollow. I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt just a few feet away from her. But when I looked again, she was gone, vanished into thin air as if she had never been there at all. Trembling, I stepped out of the car and cautiously approached the spot where she had stood, half expecting her to materialize out of the darkness and drag me down into whatever hellish realm she had come from. But there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching out before me, disappearing into the inky blackness of the night. I shivered, suddenly acutely aware of how vulnerable I was out here alone in the darkness. I needed to get out of here, to put as much distance between myself and this accursed road as possible. I hurried back to the car and jumped behind the wheel, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I hit the gas, the tires spinning against the asphalt as I sped away into the night. But no matter how fast I drove, it felt like the road stretched on forever, leading me deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it, the faint glow of streetlights on the horizon, a beacon of safety in the darkness. Relief flooded through me as I drew closer, the oppressive weight of the night slowly lifting from my shoulders. But as I passed beneath the flickering streetlights, I caught a glimpse of something in the rear-view mirror, something lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights, something that should not exist in this world or any other. And in that moment, I knew that I would never truly escape the haunting road, that it would follow me wherever I went, a shadowy specter haunting my every waking moment until the end of time.
The road stretched before me like a black ribbon, disappearing into the darkness of the night. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white as I navigated the deserted highway. It was well past midnight, and the only company I had was the rhythmic hum of the engine and the whispering wind that danced through the trees lining the roadside. As I drove, an eerie sensation crept over me, a feeling of being watched from the shadows just beyond the reach of my headlights. I shook off the unease, chalking it up to tiredness and the unfamiliarity of the isolated road. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the task at hand, the feeling persisted, like a cold hand tracing icy fingers down my spine. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a burst of static filling the car before resolving into a voice that sent a shiver down my spine. "Beware the road, traveler," it whispered, the words dripping with an otherworldly chill. I glanced at the radio in confusion, but it was silent once more, as if the voice had never been there at all. Unease settled in the pit of my stomach as I continued on my journey, the voice echoing in my mind like a sinister mantra. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that I was driving straight into the heart of darkness itself. As I rounded a bend in the road, I caught sight of something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the highway, its silhouette illuminated by the glow of my headlights. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed to a stop, my breath catching in my throat. What was someone doing out here in the middle of the night, all alone on this deserted stretch of road? I rolled down the window, calling out to the figure in the darkness. "Hey, are you okay?" But there was no response, just the sound of the wind whispering through the trees and the distant cry of a lone owl. I hesitated for a moment, then reached for the door handle, intending to get out and investigate. But before I could act, the figure turned to face me, and I recoiled in horror. Its features were twisted and contorted, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to pierce straight through to my soul. And then, with a sound like the rustling of leaves, it vanished into thin air, leaving me alone on the deserted highway once more. I slammed the door shut and hit the gas, my heart racing as I sped away from the spot where the figure had stood. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me like a suffocating blanket. As I drove on, the road seemed to stretch out endlessly before me, the trees closing in around me like grasping fingers. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it. A signpost up ahead, illuminated by the faint glow of my headlights. Relief flooded through me as I drew closer, the promise of civilization beckoning me like a beacon in the night. But as I passed beneath the sign, my blood ran cold. It read, "Welcome to the Whispering Highway." A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. I had stumbled onto a road that was not meant for the living, a highway haunted by the restless souls of those who had lost their way in the darkness. And now I was trapped here too, doomed to wander its lonely stretches for all eternity.